Thank you for this introduction and good evening. I will talk in English because my knowledge of Spanish is, I understand it a bit, but I certainly don't talk it very well. From 2006 to 2009, I had the privilege of restoring the Seven Sacraments in the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp, in Belgium. It was a 3 years full-time project and an ideal opportunity to examine the altarpiece thoroughly. In this presentation, I want to guide you through the restoration process and show you certain technical aspects of the paintings. But let's first have a closer look at what is represented in this masterpiece. The idea of showing the Seven Sacraments as taking place simultaneously within the same church was surely Rogier's inspiration. The first sacrament is represented on the left panel. It is baptism. People are dressed in contemporary dress in the fashions of the 1440s, and some of them seem to be portraits. The second sacrament is confirmation. Here we see a bishop applying the holy ointment on the forehead of a child. Next to the bishop is a priest who ties a band of white cloth around the head of a child, and there's also 3 children walking away, having received confirmation. Behind the confirmation is a third sacrament, confession. We see a man kneeling in front of a seated canon who blesses him. The Eucharist is at the altar of the choir screen. That's the most important sacrament, of course. It is in the nave behind the crucified Christ. On the right wing, we see first ordination, where a man is kneeling in front of a bishop to be consecrated as a priest. And the sixth sacrament is marriage. And here we see a couple blessed by the priest. And completely to the right, in the seven sacraments, we see the extreme unction. Here, a dying man is lying in bed where he receives the last sacrament. Each sacrament is presided over by a hovering angel and a gilded scroll inscribed with a pertinent text. The texts are in Latin. The crucifixion takes place in the center of the nave. The figures are huge in scale, and the tau cross is enormously tall, almost filling the nave. Below the cross are figures on the same scale as Christ: St. John, who supports the fainting Virgin, and the 3 Marys. The figure on our right, holding her left hand under her breast, may be the Magdalene, for her clothes are very similar to those worn by the Magdalene in the Prado descent from the cross. The sacraments themselves are celebrated by and in front of people who are only a little too large for their settings. So there's a clear difference in scale of the people represented in this church. But Rogier van der Weyden is able to represent something like that without you thinking there's something strange. This man didn't know how to paint. It's really one of his very strong, it's a power that he uses to create a tension in the painting. The altarpiece of the Seven Sacraments was painted between 1440 and 1445, and it was painted for Chevreau, the Bishop of Tournai. He is represented on the left wing, and both of his coat of arms are on each panel. To the left is his personal coat of arms, and on the right, the one of the town of Tournai. Jean Chevreau was born at Poligny. Philip the Good made him a president of his Great Council in February 1433, And in 1440, he became Bishop of Tournai. He died in 1460. His body was buried in the Tournai Cathedral, and his heart in a chapel that he had founded in the collegiate church of Saint Hippolytus at Poligny. Here you see the famous dedication miniature of the Chronique des Hainaut, which is generally accepted as a work of Rogier van der Weyden. It shows Philip the Good with his entourage, and the man in red is Chevreau, Bishop Chevreau. And this is a detail of both portraits. To the left, the portrait in the Seven Sacraments, and to the right, in the Chronique des Hainaut. I think you can clearly see that it's the same man that is represented in both. And this shows also how important he was. He was really very close to Philip the Good. The interior represented in the Seven Sacraments is clearly not the Cathedral of Tournai, nor the church at Poligny. It seems to be freely based on the St. Gudula Cathedral in Brussels. That is where Rogier van der Weyden worked and also where his wife was born. The triptych was bought in 1826 in Dijon by a man called Van Erdborn. He was the mayor of Antwerp, and he was one of the first collectors of early Netherlandish painting. In 1841, Van Erdborn left his collection to the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Antwerp, and that included the Seven Sacraments. And here you see the Seven Sacraments before the restoration, so before 2006. The middle panel, you can see it in the exhibition, of course, it measures about 2 meters high, and it consists of 5 butt-joint planks. So here the lines that you see is in fact the wood, the planks that the panels are made up, or that they are constructed. On the wing panels comprise 4 planks, with the outer ones being very narrow. You see at the extreme sides there's little planks of 4 centimeters in width. This is the reverse side. In 1844, the wing panels were thinned and cradled, so what you see here is not at all how an original back would look. I'll show you immediately how that might have looked. And so the wing panels are cradled. Those crossbars that you see on the panels are 19th century, and it's a system to keep the panels flat, in fact. The middle panel received a very unusual treatment, and 14 vertical furrows were cut into the back, and into these were inserted pieces of oak of about 2 centimeters in width. And these lats, they have a U profile, which is opposed to the more common V profile that you would find in treatments like this. And also, probably this was done to try to correct the strong convex deformation that is in the panel. If you will look in the exhibition, you can see it's still kind of, deformation still is there. To give you an idea of how the reverse of these panels might have looked original before they were cradled and planed down, I show you here a deposition by a follower of Rogier van der Weyden. The reverse side of this panel is roughly finished and tool marks are clearly visible. With dendrochronology or 3-ring dating, Peter Klein has established that the panels of the 7 Sacraments are Baltic oak, and that the latest hardwood ring was formed in the year 1431. So it means that one of the planks of the panels that was used in the panels comes from a tree that was still growing in 1431. So there we know for sure that the 7 Sacraments must date after 1431. It's important because there's no date on the 7 Sacraments, also no signature, so that kind of information can help us to give a date. Dendrochronology is the scientific method of dating based on the analysis of patterns of tree rings, also known as the growth rings. And with dendrochronology, it can date the time at which the tree rings were formed in several types of woods, and it can date it to the exact calendar year. That's why you really can say until, the date is 1431. And what you see above on the slide, in fact, illustrates how this is kind of done. I mean, the people date lots of different wooden elements, like, for instance, you see the image of a tree or a mill or a barn, and all the rings in these elements are measured, and that is kind of translated into a graphic, which you see there. And those graphics make then a very, very long reference graphic. So if you would then look to the 7 sacraments and measure all those rings, make also a graphic, you can go and see where that fits into this very long graphic, and that's how you can establish a really date to a year. The very good quality oak wood for panel paintings was imported from the Baltic region to the Netherlands. So it's not kind of local wood, that's quite normal, and the 7 Sacraments is painted on such wood. A lot of research has to be done before starting a restoration treatment. One needs to have a good idea of the condition and of the history of the object that is going to be treated. In the archives of the Royal Museum of Fine Arts, there are about 50 documents that provide information regarding restoration treatments in the 19th and in the 20th century. We found mention of 9 restoration treatments. Most of these treatments were very minimal conservation treatments, which means that only the paint layer was kind of secured. So if the paint layer was lifting, they would put it back and do nothing more than that. The support of the painting was often the object of discussion and of the interventions that we've seen that it had been cradled. Only in 3 instances we found mention of restoration of the paint layer. So that's in the last 100 or 200 years almost. They were probably only three times, which might sound as a lot, but that's quite normal for those kind of paintings. Beside written documents, there are also a number of old photographs that provide some information of former interventions. On a photograph of 1949, for instance, we see a discolored retouching along a joint, which had been retouched at a certain moment before 2006, and that's why in 2006, that line, the dark line that you see in the old photograph, is much less visible. Also, with the study before restoration, we look, of course, also with different techniques, and one of them is looking at the painting in ultraviolet light. That's what you see. This is a photograph in ultraviolet light. And a lot of retouchings were visible, and all the dark spots you see in this photograph are in fact were retouchings, and often also lacunae, so places where the paint layer, the original paint layer, has been lost. Here you see a diagram, after all that study, before you start restoration, a diagram of the lacunae and the overpaints that were detected in the painting. So this were the kind of problems we thought we would encounter. Apart from aesthetic reasons to undertake the restoration of the 7 Sacraments, there was also a conservation problem of lifting and flaking paint. And here you can clearly see on these photographs in raking light how the paint kind of comes loose from the panel. So the restoration was undertaken, and first the top varnish layers, which were yellowed and dirty, were removed from the whole surface of the triptych. This is done with solvents and a little swab. And together with these top layers of varnish, recent retouchings were easily removed exposing older, more insoluble retouchings. The more insoluble retouchings were softened with solvents again and removed under the microscope with a scalpel. Some retouchings were on top of fillings and covering original paint. The most significant damage is found in the top of the middle panel, and the detail you see here is before it was retouched, so this gives an idea of what is white is where the original paint is gone, that you don't see that anymore because that's retouched. And what you see here is, for 15th century painting, it's a relatively good condition, I would say. Not very good, but it's not dramatic. And this is the worst part of the triptych. Retouchings also covered damages made during former restorations. For example, paint areas burned by a too hot spatula used in fixation. And here we can see this type of damage on a pillar in the foreground of the middle panel. And similar burn marks are present throughout the triptych. Another type of damage that I encountered, you see here, it's when the paint layer was secured before. I mean, the paint layer started kind of moving and swimming and was kind of, glued on the panel in a wrong position. But that's minor, it's minor things, and it's still like that on the painting, and I suppose nobody has noticed it, but it's still there like that. After the removal of the first varnish layers, it was possible to secure the lifting paint, which you see here again, the lifting paint, and that was secured. Here you see a detail in the red dress of the Magdalene, to the left with old retouchings, and to the right after the cleaning. And this shows what a difference it makes if you take away all those old discolored retouchings. I don't know if I can, yeah, if you look, for instance, to this retouching there, if you take that away, the whole kind of folds kind of start to function in a different way. You get much more the volume back. So it's very important to remove all those kind of spots. A lot of original paint was recovered during the cleaning, and including specific features like this pin, which must have been mistaken during a reformer restoration for a scratch, and which was overpainted. So this is, you see the pin here in the headscarf, and that's with the old retouchings on it. And when I removed them, I thought it was a scratch when I was working. And then when I removed it, I suddenly found the head of a pin. I thought, no, this is painted, and there was the needle or the pin that goes through the headscarf. Sometimes blanket retouchings were used to cover minor damages or craquelure, and this you can, for instance, see in the forehead of Johannes, where here, this is before cleaning. In ultraviolet, you can see that it's full of retouchings, and this is after the cleaning. The retouchings are taken off, and this is what was the real damage. For this little damage, they kind of covered the whole head, probably also to kind of, retouch a little bit these craquelures to calm them down a bit. But of course, you lose the wrinkles, the painted wrinkles that are there. You couldn't see them anymore. This is a detail before and after treatment, again, to illustrate what a difference it makes if you take away all these spots. The beautiful modeling of the flesh and the red-tinged sorrow of the eyes is completely regained. Like if you, for instance, compare the volume that you have here in the neck, what you find back here, which is really so impressive, the way Rogier knows how to paint with those kind of geometric forms almost. They were completely lost by the retouchings and the dirt on the painting. The original frame of the triptych is lost, and here you see how it was framed before the restoration. The black and white image shows that this frame was formerly crowned with a neo-Gothic decoration. The restoration was an opportunity to study how the seven sacraments might have been originally framed. The format corresponds to the central part of the bone polyptych. Maybe the seven sacraments originally could have been a similar polyptych. So what I'm saying is that it is possible that if you see that these three panels correspond what you have here, it is possible that seven sacraments had also wings that are lost now, that you could kind of close it. We don't know because the original frame is lost, and on an original frame you could eventually see hinges, but you can't see them anymore, of course. So we have no idea, but it is quite possible. For several reasons, it was decided to make a new frame. One of the reasons was that the profiles of the old frame were too wide, which caused the third Mary to be awkwardly elongated, and that's this figure which goes over two panels. And on the left you see the new profile. On the right, I mean, you see the new profile. It is based on the original frame of the bone polyptych and on the logic of the painting. Carved pillars like the one that you see here can be found in other 15th century frames, and here they complete the painted pillars that are painted in trompe-l'œil in the painting itself. A second reason for a new framing was to accommodate the curve of the middle panel. Here the frame is straight, and here it kind of curves to accommodate that deformation. To design this new frame, some models were first made in papier-mâché, and precise measurements of the panel and its curves had to be taken. And in fact, here you see already the people that worked on the frame, but more people participated in this restoration to help with retouching and gilding and to do the work on the support. And now this kind of gives an idea of the restoration. Now we look more to the painting technique, and I'll show you some details and samples to talk more about how the painting is made. And this is the first sample of the paint layer, which gives you an idea how it is built up. It's taken into the purple mantle of the figure that we've just seen. It's the kneeling figure on the left wing, and it illustrates the build-up of the paint layer. And here you can follow what you would see if you would cut through a panel. For people who don't know how it works to get a paint sample like that, it's in fact a very, very small piece of the paint that we take. It's like, you know, big as a pinhead. It's really very small. And that is put into resin, and when the resin is dry, you kind of grind the little block of resin down until you get to your tiny paint sample, and then you can kind of get a cut through of the paint layers. So what we see here, if we do that, is here the ground layer. So that's the preparation layer, white preparation layer, which is applied onto the panel to cover the wood, in fact, to make a good support to paint on. And then a very thin black line, that's the underdrawing. So the first drawing that Rogier has applied on the panel. You will see more images of that. On top of that, there is a whitish layer, which is a first layer to isolate the drawing. It's a kind of uniform layer without lots of, just applied over the whole panel. And then these layers that you see here, they are the color that is used to paint the mantle. First a gray layer, then a purple layer, and then a red glaze to make that kind of warm purple that is still there. And on top of that, we still see some other layers which are retouching and recent varnish. Here, this is an image in ultraviolet light where you see the varnish which really fluorescence white. So from here on, you have varnish and not original paint anymore. The composition was drawn onto the chalk ground with black paint or ink using a brush. The underdrawing can be seen locally through transparent paint layers. In a few places or in certain damages where the paint layer is lost, you can also see the underdrawing. And that's what you see here. This is a wing of an angel, and there is a lacuna where the paint layer has chipped off. The white you see is the preparation layer that was applied on the panel, and the black line is the underdrawing, which, you know, it continues here, but here it's under the paint layer. So you see a little piece here, you can kind of look into the paint layers, in fact. And what you see here on the right is an image in infrared reflectography. It's a photograph, it's a technique in which you can make photographs of things that the human eye can't see, but that you can register on the photograph. And it's kind of like looking through the paint layers a bit to see the underdrawing. So what you see here, for instance, is the ceiling of the church, the vaults. And you see that, in fact, Van der Weyden has changed his mind. First, this rib of the vault was drawn here, and the windows were bigger. And then he changed his mind. So he kind of, while he was painting it, he changed it a bit. A lot of those small changes are present in the painting, and that's quite interesting because you really see how he developed his work. Even there's gilded arcs, and even those ones, you know, the ones that make the frame, they were drawn first, and that you see here in lacunas of in that gilding, you see a line kind of going here, down here too. And that is quite amazing because there was not a lot of reason to do that, because once you apply the gold layer onto that drawing, you don't see the underdrawing anymore. So you don't see all those details where the shadows have to come. So it's possible that it was not his first idea to apply gilding. It's possible that the first idea for the Seven Sacraments was that it would be painted like the Miraflores triptych. If you go into the exhibition, it's there too. It's also paintings with arcs like that. And they are painted in brown, they are not gilded. It's possible that that was also the case with the Seven Sacraments. And this would also explain why in the Seven Sacraments the gilding of those arches was applied after the architecture was painted. Because the gray of the architecture, that's what you see here, the gray of the architecture, it goes under the gold. And that's not really normal in the 15th century. You would first apply the gold, because gold leaf kind of tends to fly away and be stuck on the paint layer. So the first thing to do is to apply the gold leaf and then you paint. That didn't happen like that in the Seven Sacraments. So personally, I think that Van der Weyden thought his first idea was to do something else, and he changed his mind. We also already saw a lacuna where you could see what is under it, and this is the second one. It's a very small lacuna next to the head of this figure. And only the top layers of the paint are lost. And the underlying, you see an underlying layer which is a pinkish gray. And that's, I told you in the sample, we saw that on top of the underdrawing, a layer was applied, just a kind of layer over all the painting. And that's probably this layer, which is we call the imprimatura. Some nice details that you see when you restore a painting, like, for instance, here, a hair of a brush, the brush of Rogier van der Weyden, which is stuck into the paint layer. There's quite a few hairs that I found like that, and they are quite short, kind of like 7 to 4 millimeters long. So it's it's quite short hairs he was using there. A question that raised during the restoration was about a brown layer on a green dress of the reading woman in the right panel. Is this layer a discolored glaze or is it not? It could, for instance, be dirty varnish, and you could think, I have to take this away because it's not original. So that was the question. As you can see, the brown is lacking here. For instance, it stops here, and you see the underlying green exposed. So what is this brown was the question, and what to do with it. The brown is also missing on another part. For instance, here you see the bright green, and the brown is next to that. The brown is a transparent layer, and under the binocular microscope, no pigment grains could be seen. And we also see a fine pattern of craquelures in that brown. In the brown, you can also see brush strokes. You clearly see the brush strokes. The brown was applied just over the whole dress without respecting any folds, which makes it also, you question, like, is this original or is it just kind of applied afterwards? But if you look here in a still smaller detail, that brown seems to pass under details. For instance, here you see it kind of continues here, this line, under small details, original details. So here you think, it is not a varnish, it is original. And the same was seen in other greens, like for instance in a child here, it's the same kind of thing. The top layer is just applied without kind of taking into account small folds or details in the dress. A place was chosen to give an answer on this question. A place was chosen to take a sample, and that's we chose it there. The sample was taken in an existing lacuna in a gray highlight on the fur collar. In fact, samples are always taken into existing damage that we will make a tiny little bit bigger. We will never just take a sample in the middle of a painting like that. And it looked here like that the brown layer was passing under those hairs. So we thought if we take a sample here, maybe that will learn us something. And indeed, the cross-section from that sample, it shows clearly, and you see here, this is shown bigger, what you see here, this part. It shows clearly that the top layer, that this is that brown layer, and here it goes under the gray of the fur. And the interesting thing is also where it's covered by the fur, it looks more green, and here it looks more brown. So indeed, the brown layer in this dress is original. It's a discolored glaze. It's not an old varnish. And often in restorations in the past, those glazes were taken away. And that also happened if you look in the painting. I had some questions here from colleagues, restorers, like what happens here? If you look to this figure here, you will see a much brighter green. That's where somebody before has taken away that brown, which we didn't do because it is original. I believe that in the Seven Sacraments, beside Rogier's hand, the hand of two assistants can be distinguished. With a few comparisons, I hope to make this apparent. And this diagram shows the partition of work. The areas in red were painted by Rogier van der Weijden, the areas in green by a close assistant, and the areas in yellow are executed by a second, less skillful painter. I'll first compare two faces of the middle panel. So in red, Rogier, and in green, an assistant. With the assistant here on the left, the faces are delineated with hard, dark lines. The modeling of the flesh is less subtle, and the folds in the headscarf are wooden, and they are lacking in volume. I think you can kind of see it here if you compare the folds here and what you see happening here. that these ones are much more subtle and have much more volume than what you see here. The woman on the right can be attributed to Rogier van der Weyden. A close look to the hands of this woman, painted by the assistant, reveals that they were added after the hand of the Virgin was painted by Rogier. So this hand is from the Virgin, and it was painted by Rogier, and then only afterwards this one was kind of completed by the assistant who painted on the left wing. The hand seems to be painted over the red dress of St. John, so it passes over the red color. And some of the dark contour lines around the hand of the Virgin were reworked by the assistant to integrate his addition. So when you have to imagine that this hand was there and St. John was there, and then the other figure was painted in, and these hands are painted, and then to kind of make them work together, the assistant kind of just accentuated some of these dark lines that you see here, which are much, much harder than what you see in other places where Rogier van der Weyden paints hands. In the infrared reflectography, you can see that all the hands, also these hands, were painted. So the figure is not, it's not a kind of later, really later addition. It was foreseen, but simply Rogier didn't paint it because it belonged to the left panel. The assistant didn't always master anatomy and foreshortening, which you can see clearly here. I mean, this is a photograph during restoration. That's why you see still lacunae in the paint layer. But you can clearly see if Rogier van der Weyden paints a hand, you would have a really good image of foreshortening, and the assistant doesn't manage to do that. This is a head painted by Rogier on the left panel, in normal light and in raking light. The raking light is on the right, so you see more the relief in the paint layer. And it illustrates the technique of the painter. On a base tone, a lighter and a darker color were applied, wet in wet, painted wet in wet, to model the forms. And sometimes sgraffito was used to exploit the color of the underlayer or to soften highlights. When Rogier was using the back of his brush, that's what he did here. This is just the back of his brush to scrape some lines. The sgraffito lines are successfully incorporated in the modeling. So if you see the painting normally, these lines, they seem really to be part of wrinkles in the forehead. The assistant clearly saw that, and he did the same. And these are two photographs just in normal light, not raking light. So here you see, you don't really see the lines, they are part of the head. But here, if you look to the painting, you think, what are these lines doing there? And that's clearly the assistant kind of, he looked to his master and he saw him doing that, and he tries the same, but he doesn't, you know, it doesn't make any real sense to do it there. This is detail painted by the first assistant and one painted by the second assistant. So, the first assistant in green and the second assistant is the one that did this part in yellow. And the detail comes from, so the second assistant, that's what is in yellow here, and this assistant is from there. Again, this is before retouching, so you see still lacunae which are filled and ready to retouch. But if you compare the first assistant, if you look, for instance, to the feet, how they are painted and how nice you have details and modeling, and you compare it to this, which is kind of quite flat and surprisingly, shows surprisingly, little form, really, and volume. Or if you compare details like the fur here, how fine it's painted and how kind of rigid it's there, that's really differences that clearly indicate that you have two different hands painting here. Here you see the difference of quality in close-up and all the small details and the volume. You really feel the feet here, while here there's no kind of volume at all. And you can clearly see, because this is before retouching, it's not at all a question of condition. This is what you see is the original paint there. When cleaning the painting, one notices the difference between the master and the assistant quite clearly. When working on a part of Rogier, one is constantly thrilled and amazed, whereas in the areas done by the assistant, one is slightly disappointed. To resume again, I think the middle panel was completely done by Rogier, with the exception of the third Mary, who's here. That is the woman kneeling partly on the left panel. On the wing panels, Rogier painted the angels. Possibly an assistant helped with the architecture. And in the left panel, Rogier painted the figures starting from the background. He started here from the background, and he came, he worked until the front, in fact, until there, which means until the bishop, the donor, Chevreul. So probably he kind of painted the most important part of the painting, and until he painted the guy who paid for the work, and then afterwards the assistant could go on with the work. There's two little things that you still see here in red. That's the two dogs. They are, I think, they were added quite late. They are painted over the tiles, and there the quality clearly indicates that that's painted by Rogier van der Weyden, and maybe it's simply kind of to fill a space that was not full enough, or where he thought he had a hole at the end, at the last moment of the painting. A very curious technical detail in the Antwerp Seven Sacraments is found in 12 heads that were originally painted on tin foil and applied to the panel. The edges of the tin foil are clearly visible in raking light. That's what you see here. You can clearly see, the tin foil that was cut out and then glued into the panel. And the foil is also visible in the X-radiograph. Here you clearly see the head in much lighter, and even here, this is the edge of the tin foil. Here you see the straight line of the tin foil. And also in the infrared reflectography, again, you see the darker, that's where the tin foil is. Similar inserted heads are present in about 10 other early Netherlandish altarpieces. And we may presume that these heads are portraits, and that it was easier for the painter or for an assistant to go to the sitter than for him to come to the studio, and also that the sitter wanted to approve the actual portraits that would be inserted into the composition. Because otherwise you can just wonder why, if it's easier to go to the sitter, why not simply make a drawing of him and then copy the drawing in the painting? It seems logic that the reason for that was that the sitter really wanted to see what will be his final portrait and wanted a guarantee for that. Tinfoil as an intermediate support seems, in the 15th century anyway, a logical choice, taking into account that it was used in applied relief decoration. It's called brocart appliqué, with a French term, and that was pasted onto paintings and sculptures. It's logic, in the 15th century, if you would paint and you would think about, I need something to glue on the painting, that you would think of tinfoil. The tinfoil originally had the appearance of silver, but now it's oxidized to a dark gray color. And here you see a small lacunae in one of those heads, and this is one place where the silver still remained good, and the gray that you see around it is the oxidized tinfoil. One sample was taken in a head-on tinfoil, and it was taken in a white headscarf. It was taken like here, in the white headscarf that is painted on top of the area where the tinfoil is. And this shows that the heads on tinfoil were inserted during the execution of the painting and not after completion. So they are really completely original. The sample that you see here is broken in two pieces, but all the layers are present, all the layers that we have to see. So again, we see the white ground layer, the preparation that is on the panel, and then a light colored layer, probably the imprimatura, and an adhesive layer. And then you see the tinfoil layer, this one corresponds to what comes on top here, this gray, that's the oxidized tin. An ochreish layer on top. And then, in fact, it's again the painting that starts. It's again a purple color, so you have a grayish layer, and then the purple from the mantle. And all on top we have again white, and that's the white from the headscarf that you see here. So this sample really proves that the tinfoil is under the headscarf and is part of the buildup of the paint layer. In the Portinari altarpiece of Hugo van der Goes, that's a painting that is in the Uffizi in Firenze, there is a head painted on tinfoil, in fact the portrait of Portinari, and that head is about life size. In the Antwerp Seven Sacraments, most portraits are about 7 centimeters high, but one inserted head, it's the man standing quite far back in the choir easel, is only 2 centimeters high, so it's really very, very small. Even a small head in the background would be painted on tinfoil and stuck in there. The head itself is badly damaged and repainted, so I did not remove the retouchings here because I'm convinced the original is too damaged. But you see it here, and also in the X-radiograph you see again the form of the tinfoil. And there were other techniques with which we really proved that it was original. On the right panel there is a head that is not original. If you go and see in the painting you'll see this. Sorry, I have to go. If you see this head, it's not original. The texture, the tonality, and the rendering or execution of this head differs from the others. Also, the paint layer does not show craquelures. It might be a 19th century head. On the X-radiograph, there is a kind of whitish halo around this head, and that's what you see all around here. You have kind of like a white outline. X-ray fluorescence has proven that this is tinfoil, so there's still some remaining of tinfoil around the heads. It seems that there was once a complete head painted on tinfoil, and a restorer in the 19th century probably must have thought that it was a later edition and removed it, hoping to find some original underneath, and he clearly didn't find anything, and he painted then a head instead. This 19th century head is still there. I didn't remove it, of course, because there was nothing under it. This is what this head looks like in ultraviolet, and you can also see that the fluorescence of all this head is clearly different from these heads here, which is also a proof that it's not original, or an indication that it's not original. In the infrared reflectography, in which we see, as I've told you, the underdrawing, it's interesting because here the tinfoil has been removed, and you can see kind of, that's why you can see the underdrawing under it. And the underdrawing under it doesn't seem to correspond here to the head. In this case, this head does not seem to have been foreseen in the underdrawing, even the place was not foreseen. In other heads, you can see an underdrawing which corresponds more or less to the tinfoil head. For instance, here, and I've drawn the outline here, this is the infrared reflectography. You see there a bit the lips and the nose. There is a head, but in another position. So here it's clear that there was a head drawn, and then the tinfoil was glued on that, but more or less. And in other heads, that was not the case. It was not foreseen in the underdrawing, but there were still heads added to it. And these are some more of these. I told you there's 12 of these heads. These are 3 of these heads. And again, this head is one of those heads that was removed during a former restoration, next to 2 heads that remain. So these 2 heads are on tinfoil. This one is not anymore. But during the cleaning, I found this, what you see here around. And that's the outline of the original head and remains of the adhesive that was used to glue the tinfoil. And So you see the detail of what happened. So the head was then painted, the 19th century head that I kept. And what you see here is in fact before restoration, during restoration, so after the cleaning, and here after retouching. And you can see if you go looking to the painting now, you'll see this is kept like that because it gives information of what was there before. The angels in the Antwerp Seven Sacraments, that was another surprise. They were first painted completely in monochrome. The violet angel had violet hands and a violet head, and the blue angel was completely blue, etc. It's just like the angel that you see here, for instance, in the Berlin Miraflores triptych, which is also in the exhibition. So you can see this was changed then. You can see for instance, in this purple angel, you can see in between the fingers, you see the purple that is under it. Here also, you see the purple, the layer that is under it. This was changed during the painting process. So first he was completely purple, and at a certain moment, Rogier van der Weyden must have decided, no, in this case, I'll make the angels with flesh tone, and he changed that. Here, these angels, with the other angels, you see the same thing. Around these hands, with the yellow angel, around the hands and around the head, there's kind of darker retouchings, which are in fact original retouchings by Rogier van der Weyden, who changed the figure. Here also, around the blue angel, you see that there's kind of a bluish tint there, which was kind of covered with the gray. That is original, that's a change. Another aspect which was a surprise, another technical aspect, in the architecture in the Seven Sacraments, numerous guidelines and small marks were incised to indicate or measure geometric features of the composition. Most of these incisions, if not all, are scored into the wet paint. The stylus pushed aside fresh paint, thus forming ridges, and sometimes dragging wet paint along while scoring. Consequently, the incisions are not a part of the preliminary drawing process. The lines vary in width and can be as fine as a hair, barely visible to the naked eye. Nearly all the incised lines are straight as an arrow and must have been drawn with a ruler and a stylus. Along most of the incised lines, one can see compass holes at regular distances. That's, for instance, you see lines that I'm talking about, these kind of lines that you see here. Here it's kind of scored into the paint, and here, for instance, you don't see it anymore because there's afterwards another paint line that was done over that. And the holes that you see here, that's holes of a compass that were made with a compass. I'll show more of these things. In fact, each stone, each joint was measured out in this way. And here you see a small detail. Here, this is 1 centimeter, what you see next to it. So it's really very small. The sculpted vegetal motifs on the capital were even measured. And that's what you see here. These little lines, that's just scored into the wet paint here also to indicate all the measures, to have really each of these things is measured. This is barely 7 millimeters high, so it's really very, very small. A compass was also used to measure the stones of the ribs of the vaults, and I'll show you immediately in more close-up. But I also want to draw your attention to this window, which is probably during the cathedral was built, and when the stained glass window was not ready yet, they would brick up those things. So this is a detail that maybe you haven't seen in the church yet, but it is there. So I said that a compass was also used to measure the stones, and that's what you see here. I show you the detail of this part, and then you see, if you look from close, you see all these little lines with a little point of a compass. Each time a slightly curved line and a compass hole in the middle. again, that's how they look. And in fact, what happens is that the painter used the compass with a kind of fixed distance, and each time puts his point in one of those lines and draw a new line, and then goes up like that, so that each time has the same distance. The incisions occur in the architecture in the middle panel that was certainly painted by Rogier, and in the wing panels where an assistant might have helped painting the vaults. This practice shows Rogier as a geometer, constructing the setting of the Antwerp Seven Sacraments with extreme accuracy. There are also a few incised lines that are freehand, as for instance in the gilded surface of the banderoles of the angels, to mark the position of the inscriptions. Fine guidelines were incised using a ruler and a compass into the gilding in trompe-l'œil, and that's what you see. Well, I put the painting here to its side because this detail is also on its side, and it's a detail from the gilded part. And if you look really in close-up, you see here, for instance, here somebody passed with a very straight line, pushing away the gold, which kind of leaves. Here it's pushed aside. Another detail where you see how the black paint is partially kind of gone into the incised line. That's what you see here. In several places in the Seven Sacraments, there are marks consisting of a series of relatively short parallel lines. They run in different directions, what you see here, and there are different series of marks. Here you see next to each other a mark with 7 lines in 1 centimeter and one a finer one. So this is quite also a strange thing. We were wondering, what is this? These marks, and these are a few. You see them also under the gold, where you can clearly see they are in the ground layer. And the marks are all over the painting. It was very strange to see this. You find them also in other paintings, and I show you here Van der Goes, or a 16th century painting with the same marks. In fact, a colleague of mine, by doing experiments, found how these marks were made. It's in fact when applying a ground layer with a palette knife that you see here on the right, what happens sometimes is the palette knife kind of can stick to the ground, to a still wet ground layer, and it can start vibrating, and then you kind of get this kind of regular mark. So these marks just indicate that the ground layer was kind of applied with, not with a brush, or at least the last one, but with a metal palette knife to really make it very smooth. So, and now I just want, as last slides, just to show you some details which are really showing the skill of Rogier van der Weyden. Some beautiful details. Rogier often painted wet in wet, and here you can see the curl on the forehead of the angel, which is created by dragging these curls here, dragging a dry brush through the wet pink paint. So there's not really color here, it's just kind of a relief that you see, which makes the curl very quickly done. And these angels are angels which decorate the high altar on the middle panel, which I find the most, they are very small, but if you look then from very close, this is how the face is painted. It's really very quickly done and very nicely done. Or a hand that I show you. In reality, this hand is about 1.5 centimeters high, so it's very, very small. And if you see the bold brushwork of which this hand is painted, that is really very amazing. Or the beautiful face, or the fainting Virgin. And finally, I just want to show you my favorite figure in the whole painting, the Magdalene, in her very special position. Thank you.